You're listening to the Better for America podcast, presented by Amac, the Association of Mature American Citizens.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Weber. This is your Amac podcast, Better for America. Today, we're back with the Reb and Rob show, and we have some great new issues to talk to you about, some fresh insights to share with you, and of course, joined today by Amac's very own national spokesman, Robert, or Bobby Charles. As most of you know, Bobby's background, he gives Amac members and all of those listening a really unique look at the world and political happenings, legal events. So just as a reminder, Bobby served in the Reagan and Bush 41 White Houses. He managed the House Oversight Committee's inquiries for 5 years, defense, state, justice, and even NASA. He is former New York and D.C. litigator, a former U.S. Court of Appeals clerk, and Bobby later served as Assistant Secretary of State under Colin Powell. And you actually, Bobby, you set up America's police training programs in many places like Afghanistan, Iraq, Kosovo, and also taught law oversight at Harvard's Extension School. And Bobby, you've written hundreds of articles on our website. I want to encourage people, go to amac.us. You've got some great fresh articles that we're posting just this week. So I'm really excited to have you here with us, Bobby, to talk about what's really going on across the nation, but not just here at home, overseas. I'm excited to sort of dig into that. Bobby, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Excellent. So, Bobby, you and I often we talk about events and how they are really, so many of them are tied together. Sacrifices of the past allow us to enjoy the present. And so I love that we're able to sort of weave stories of our history and then talk about today. And the obligations that we have as Americans that are tied to our future. So, Bobby, I do want to, talk to you about freedom, specifically freedom today. I want to talk about how freedom is under fire, both here at home and overseas. We need to be ready. We need to be alert. We need to educate the next generation of people, and we need to stand up and fight for it. And that's exactly what AMAC is doing each and every day. We are fighting for our freedoms on so many levels. So to talk a little bit about the current attacks on freedom in foreign lands, I do want to turn to China, if we could. You actually have recently suggested with urgency that we need to tell China to back off Taiwan. So could you sort of explain, all of those listening, what is really happening? What does that mean? And where could that lead?
You really point out in some ways what is the tip of the spear when it comes to international defense of freedom. Taiwan is under tremendous attack right now in terms of the threat or the intimidation that Communist China is imposing around and on them. And I just want to give people a 30-second history. Basically, China was under the rule of dynasties until about 1912. And then the Japanese, they broke into a civil war. There were a lot of warlords. The Japanese invaded them in 1937. World War II ended that in 1945. And then the communists under Mao Zedong tried to take the country. And we supported Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists who were freedom oriented. And it was a civil war that unfortunately ended with the communist domination of mainland China in 1949, pushing the freedom-loving nationalists out to Taiwan. And only in 1972, 73, Richard Nixon said, okay, we're going to have this thing called, he kind of did what they call the opening to China. And they did this Shanghai communique that said there's one China, but we're basically not going to say whether it's going to be communist or free. And we were previously very, very clear that Taiwan was its own legitimate country and that it was the legitimate government of China. After that, we changed everything and it became ambivalent. And of course, that diminished Taiwan's overall ability. But we nevertheless stayed true to them under Ronald Reagan, George Herbert Walker Bush, and particularly vocal under Trump. In fact, I think it was the first phone call Trump got was from the leader of Taiwan. So in any event, the bottom line is that Taiwan is sort of emblematic of freedom. It is its own country. I have spent time there. It is a beautiful country. These are pro-American people. If you did a program from the streets of Taipei today, people would be all over you saying, God bless America. They love America. So what's happened? China now has really ramped up the intense intimidation, if you will, of Taiwan economically, diplomatically. But on October 6th, they sent 52 warplanes into Taiwan's airspace. Now, that has never happened before. That was a record number of warplanes. Just the day or two before that, they sent 39 over. The day or two before that, 38. And earlier before that, 16. So what are they doing? They're trying to intimidate Taiwan. And the question is, why are they doing that right now? And the answer, rather self-evidently, is that they believe that Joe Biden and his team are asleep at the switch. And so what is the answer? Diplomatically, we like to deter war because it's a lot easier to prevent a war, and it's a lot less costly to prevent a war than it is to stop a war that has started either accidentally or otherwise. So the right answer is that Joe Biden needs to push back verbally. We need to send a carrier battle group through there. Other folks at AMAC are military in their orientation. They know, they're veterans. They know that if you're strong up front, it prevents war downstream, and that's what we need to do right now.
Yeah, Bobby, thank you so much. That really is a great perspective, and your wide background in these international affairs really have helped us because they give us a better perspective on where we're at today. But moving beyond China and Taiwan, can you tell us what is happening in Afghanistan right now? We're six
Yeah.
weeks after Biden's catastrophic and botched withdrawal. Give us an update on what you're seeing and hearing.
Yep. And I can do that very short order. The bottom line is, Rebecca, we still have Americans in there. We have hundreds of Americans in there. I hear that every day. I have people inside the State Department talking to me, former people at the State Department. We also have more than 100,000 allies who were true to us, true to our military, helped us for the last 20 years. And we're desperately still trying. I'll sort of leave details out because that I don't want to compromise anything. But the reality is people are on the ground in surrounding countries and in Afghanistan, desperately trying to help those people get out. And why? Because this administration left, for the first time in American history, left Americans on the ground and just ran like a dog, tail between her legs, just ran. And ran from what? Ran from a terrorist country, a country that is now controlled by the very same people that we went in to stop it from being controlled by. And I will also tell you, I get videos back and forth of firefights that are occurring right now between the Taliban and ISIS. And so civil war is definitely afoot in that country. Americans are at risk in that country still. The Biden administration wants to pivot all conversation. National media is being basically, in lockstep saying, well, we're not going to talk about that anymore. Well, you know what? You can say the war is over. You can say Americans are safe, but they're not, and our allies are not. And we still owe a moral obligation to get them out. And of course, China's watching all this. The same China that's threatening Taiwan is watching Afghanistan and saying, wow, look at that. Biden ran like a scared animal, and that's not, golly, maybe this is our time. So that's the worry.
Yeah. And, we will be paying attention to what's happening in Afghanistan, and we will be continue to post timely articles on our website at amac.us. Folks, download the news app too, because we've got some really good information coming right from amac.us, original content that you won't get anywhere else. We will be paying attention to what's going on. We know that there's more to come. We know that the unfortunately it will get worse. We understand, and we listen to those that said, we ought to be concerned about seeing sort of a rise in terrorism right here at home, where I think most Americans were feeling fairly safe when Donald Trump was president, because he really did make it very clear that if you mess with America, that there was a price that would be paid. With Biden, he's ignoring the issue. He wants Americans to sort of pretend that it doesn't exist. And again, like you just said, that the war is over, when in fact we know that the way in which Biden withdrew couldn't have been worse. I mean, to leave hundreds of millions of dollars of our own equipment there in the hands of terrorists is beyond crazy. I don't even understand how something like that can happen. So, but we'll be keeping folks updated as new developments, as we learn more about what is happening there. Bobby, I want to turn to what's happening right here at home. We're talking about our freedoms, our very freedoms that are under fire. And I just had dinner last night, Bobby, with some good friends. These are volunteer firefighters. I do quite a bit of work in that space, helping volunteer firefighters with benefits. There are certain benefits that they can have, and these firemen were sitting around the table. The gentleman next to me said, "You know, nobody here, Rebecca." He said, "One thing I've always learned is don't talk politics and religion, especially over dinner, especially if you know because you can always things never go right." He said, "But I'll tell you one thing right now." He said, "There's not a single firefighter that I know who thinks Biden's done good by this country." I mean, these are people who were there on 9/11. They left their homes. I'm here on Long Island. I'm talking to these Long Island firefighters that jumped in their car and drove 40 miles all the way down to the towers, and they were there. So many of them have lost their lives from 9/11, inhalation of whatever it was that eventually took their life, or are on disability. And they recognize that the way Biden did this, we all agree that it's not so much what he did, it's how he did it. So these are our heroes, and people are talking about it. But here at home
Just
now,
a
Bobby,
very
I want to, oh, go ahead if you wanted to
I
comment
just
or
wanted
add
to
to that.
give you a 10-second,
Yeah,
confirmation of everything you're saying. I spend a lot of time with law enforcement, as not as much with firefighters, but I'm just going to tell you that the notion of God bless America really goes to the heart of those that put their lives out. As St. Paul said, there's no greater, I'm paraphrasing, but no greater goodness in life than that a man or woman should lay their life down for another. And that's what these firefighters and law enforcement officers and veterans have done with their lives. And so a liberal said to me the other day, "Why do we say God bless America?" So of course, they asked the wrong person that question, because they got half an hour. They got half an hour of why we should love this country and why Providence and God has in fact blessed this country. But God has blessed this country with people like the people you were eating dinner with last night. That is
that's
why
right.
we are so special.
That's right. Amen. And speaking about freedom and why freedom is so precious, one thing that really got under my skin was I did receive a copy of a letter. It's dated September 29th. So I received this before mainstream was talking about it. But I know a lot of conservative news stations are talking about it. And this is a letter that came from the NSBA, which is the National School Board Association. We're going to put a copy of the letter up on the board. I'm going to read you a couple of sentences. This is a letter directed to Joseph R. Biden, President of the United States. And the subject line is regarding federal assistance to stop threats and active violence against public school children. So, you say, geez, what's going on here? Well, the very threats and acts of violence that the NSBA is pointing to are simply concerned parents, Bobby, concerned parents. Let me read to you a sentence here. The letter goes on to say, now we ask that the federal government investigate, intercept, and prevent the current threats and acts of violence against our public school officials through existing statutes, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on to say NSBA specifically solicits the expertise and resources of the U.S. Department of Justice, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, the U.S. Secret Service, and the National Threat Assessment Center. Okay, they also would like the U.S. Postal Inspection Service to intervene, open up mail, and pull out any what they deem threatening letter that is reaching the school or school board members. Now, people across the country are paying attention and they understand that critical race theory is really a toxic uh, divide and conquer strategy that I believe the left is intentionally trying to insert in our school system so that young children grow up with a certain ideology that plays to their narrative, right? And it's all about America's systemically racist, and whether you realize it or not, when you are born, you can't help it, but you are an oppressor and you are the oppressed. And they're sort of dividing people based solely on the color of their skin. Just this morning, I heard from one of the parents from Loudoun County. His name, I believe Scott Smith is his name. He was this father arrested at a school board meeting. And essentially he was emotional. He said that his daughter was assaulted in a bathroom allegedly, and she was allegedly assaulted by a boy dressed in a skirt that entered the bathroom. And I've watched the video and I saw how the whole thing unfolded, and I'm thinking to myself, my God, Bobby, if our school boards, if these associations that are supposed to be for the good turn against the parents of this country who are rightfully concerned, rightfully have every right to go to their school board and say, how do I understand what is being taught to my children and what isn't being taught to our children? And what does our president do? What does he do? He backs the NSBA. He stands in support of their claims that they are being threatened. I mean, this is they're calling domestic terrorism. Are you kidding me? While they ignore the real terrorists. Bobby, I'd like for you to comment. How does something like this happen here in America?
Yeah. So let me on the one hand tell you, I think, Rebecca, it's worse than it sounds, and then give you what I think is an outcome that could be positive. So here's why it's worse than it sounds. That entire letter that you just read to me, having, I am in Washington, but not of Washington. So that's like being an island in the ocean, and you can watch how things really work. And you know how that works, and Amac knows how that works. We're constantly battling for the right and for freedom, but we see around us what's really going on: the hypocrisy, the lack of accountability, the enlargement of the federal government. This is not an accident. This was intentional overreach. Okay, so let me just unpack this. This is a fabrication being pushed on the American people, and let me tell you why objectively I can say that. That organization, the National Association of School Boards, okay, was clearly contacted by the Department of Justice and was asked to write that letter. I guarantee you that was what happened. They and I say that because the period of time between when that letter was written, received, and a Justice Department policy emerged was a matter of hours. Okay, a couple of days maybe, and I think a weekend. Okay, that was an intentional put-up job. And the idea behind it is clearly that there are leftists that are involved in the educational system in this country, and the place you find them are the big cities, and in particular the big cities on the two coasts. You find these school boards dominated by the teachers' unions. And so we're not talking about heartland America. We're not talking about the 45 out of 50 states or 45 the majority school boards in 45 out of 50 states that are parents who step up for a little while, serve the local township, do their job, support the kids, and then go back to being the parents or whatever else they do in life. This is very, very deliberate. And I'll tell you, there are several things that come screaming out at me from this. One is that it's very clear Merrick Garland knows that this overreach by the federal government down to the local level to intimidate and chill speech by parents at the local level is utterly against not only the tradition but the laws of this country. It's essentially a constitutional breach, and he knows that because he worked in the Justice Department at times when the exact opposite point was being made, even under the Obama administration. So we see right now an intentional infliction, if you will, of what I think Mr. Sensenbrenner, a former congressman, wrote this morning, political repression. This is an intentional act to shut down opposition at the local level by parents who are saying, we control the education of our kids. These are our kids. They don't belong to the federal government. They don't belong to you. Mr. McAuliffe in Virginia, they don't belong to you. They are our kids, okay? And we will guide the moral and the personal and the educational future of these kids. And that's how we as Americans guide the future of the country. But, it's infuriating to a level, I think, where they have overstepped in a way that this is going to reverberate because what they're doing, it's part of a pattern. They are taking the federal government and they are using it like a sword against the average American. And that's coercive and that's an abuse of power. And you can see it in the military, the way that they're coming after people like Lieutenant Colonel Schiller. You can see it in the way they're coming after parents with the federal government. And Americans are not going to put up with it. I can just tell you, everybody I talk to, they're not going to put up with it. They're ready to vote these people out tomorrow.
Yeah, and I want to encourage people, don't give up. Do not let the media, don't let what you're hearing and reading frighten you or keep you from speaking with your school board, from engaging with your
That's right.
teachers, or perhaps moving your children into private schooling or homeschooling. I mean, this is what it's coming down to. But I think parents, I am so proud of the parents and grandparents that have had the courage to do the uncomfortable, to do the thing that is not the most popular. It's easier to stay quiet. It's easier to be complacent and just say, not my problem, or hopefully it's not reaching my child's brain, in this way that's really damaging to them. But if we do nothing, that is my concern, is that ultimately, little by little by little, you sort of grow up in a way. It's almost like belonging to a cult. And you could look at so many different cults over the history of the world and say, how did people fall for such a line? How did people buy into that? Why are people drinking poison and believing that they're doing this great thing? And that's how damaging, that's how manipulative uh, these kinds of things can be. This
Hmm.
ideology can be to our young children at young ages, where they sort of just blindly follow. We cannot allow that to happen. We need to preserve our freedoms. We need to recognize who we are as a nation. We need to understand our past, and we need
Hmm.
to always work to be a better country. Certainly, we have wonderful. I think just to echo what you said earlier, I
Two
agree. I
quick.
think parents are too strong on this issue. Americans are just going to dig their heels in, and this is really going to come back to bite the left. You
Two
agree?
very quick points. Two very quick points on that, Rebecca. I know we've said it before on this program, but I'm always reminded of the wisdom of the great conservative Edmund Burke, who said, "All it takes
Yeah,
for evil to prevail is for good people to do nothing."
to do
We
nothing.
cannot
Yeah,
do nothing. We need to step up. And the second thing is, people keep saying, "Well, this is just some sort of a fictionalized history about America." Listen, all you have to do is walk through a military cemetery. All you have to do is read a really authentic history of the United States, and you will understand this is the only country, this is the only people, because it's really the people. We are the only people in the history of the world who have stepped up and lost our sons and daughters in order to save other people around the world. We have stepped up in World War I, in World War II. We've stepped up all over the world to try to preserve freedom. And our theme here today about freedom being under fire, freedom has always been under fire, and freedom will always be under fire, because government and the idea of the concentration of power to suppress and to aggregate is very seductive. It is the idea that these leftists, why do they want power? They want power to exercise that power over the average person. And the whole principle of our Constitution, the whole principle of the Bill of Rights, is that it is the individual and the individual's God-given liberties and talents that we are protecting here. So America has always stepped up into the breach, often for others, in order to protect freedom. And this is our moment to step up and to
it
protect
sure is.
freedom. We need to speak up at school boards and anywhere that we feel it's appropriate.
And for those that need to know how to do that, or where do I start? This is what's great. We have tremendous resources on our website, amac.us. Search critical race theory. There is on the homepage, there's a box that says critical race theory, learn more. When you click on that, critical race theory, on the amac.us homepage, Bobby, it takes you to this great, tremendous library of resources, including how to run for your school board and win. And I tell you, if we do that across thousands of school boards across this country, then that's tremendous. If it moves the needle just a little bit, that little bit can have tremendous lasting effects for generations to come. It's that important. And
Mm-hmm.
Bobby, I just so appreciate your comments, on the failures of the leadership in this White House, in the administration, because I really do think it resonates with those who are listening. And we're seeing Biden's polls are plummeting week after week after week. People are objecting rather to the over the 4.7 trillion. Can you imagine 4.7 trillion in new Democrat spending and taxes? Nobody wants that. Our members certainly don't want it. They were against the 1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, let alone all of these other packages. So let me ask you, I want to shift a little bit to the US military, right? Because that's been on my mind. You mentioned US Marine Lieutenant Colonel Schiller. And this is another example in my view of freedoms being under fire if you speak out against the left, or say what they don't want you to say. This Lieutenant Colonel Schiller, he was put in the brig for at least a week without charges. He was not allowed to resign. And I believe now he's going to be punished harshly. And I want to ask you, Bobby, for what? For essentially saying what everyone knows, that the US political and military leadership failed in its planning? I mean, Is that so wrong that he said what we all know and think? It just seems to me that they're really using him as an example of what you can't say. Help us
Yeah,
understand a little better.
yeah, and I come at this from an unusual perspective. Although I was an assistant secretary of state, really the fabric of my life is built more around the philosophy and the life history of the military. I was 10 years naval intelligence, and my family goes back, has fought in every conflict this country has ever had, as yours. Your family goes way back in America, and mine goes all the way back to the 1640s, and on my mother's side, the 1730s. So the bottom line is, there are standards. Our military, George Washington was the paradigm, paragon and paradigm for this. Our military serves a civilian command. So there is something called the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Criminal Justice, and what it means is that in the military we have a slightly different system that says that, among other things, while you're in uniform, and I was very careful about this, you do not criticize the President of the United States. So if you do violate that, you do it knowingly with consequences. The same way, let's just say in the 1960s, you had these civil rights protesters, and they would sit down in the middle of a street. Well, what they expected to have happen wasn't the death penalty. They expected to have happen that they would be arrested, brought in, arraigned, and let go. And they would have made their point. That's the whole point. So the way that it should work in the UCMJ, the way that it should work in the military, is that there is nevertheless fairness in the application of rules, proportionality in the application of rules, if you knowingly say, and this is an individual a Marine who said, look, I recognize that what I'm about to say is going to get me a consequence. So much do I recognize that I'm willing to give up all of my retirement benefits. I'm willing to resign my commission. I'm willing to step aside. But I need to say this. And what, as you just very aptly said, Rebecca, what he said was essentially what we know to be the objective truth, and which Chairman Milley and Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin and the National Security Advisor and Biden and the whole crowd knows to be the truth. They totally messed up the withdrawal from Afghanistan. They left Americans there. We never do that. They left our allies out at the end of a tether. We never do that. They ran away from terrorists. They had the gall 2 days ago to compliment the Taliban for being professional. I will tell you, that is the same Taliban that right now is pulling people out of their homes by the hundreds and executing them. So is that professional? I don't think we should be discussing it in those terms. So having said all that, Mr. Schiller stepped up and said, I'm sorry, my conscience burdens me, and I'm going to speak about what I feel is not happening. And by the way, resign my commission, putting my stars or my stripes on the table and gone. They didn't treat him fairly. They threw him in the brig with no charges. They didn't accept his resignation. They have disproportionately demonized him. And so I see this as an extension, Rebecca. Not only does it reflect that there are going to be morale problems, deep morale problems in our military, which directly affects readiness, but it's also an extension of this idea that the federal government, for political reasons, that is to say, for partisan, political, leftist reasons, can attack above and beyond what the law will permit. This is exactly what we're seeing at the school boards. This is exactly what we're seeing in the way that the DHS decides that they're going to politically walk away from our border. This is exactly what we're seeing when you see things happen inside the military that grate or grate against the idea of due process, that grate against the idea of proportionality. So, let's stop thinking about professionalism on the part of the Taliban and start using some professionalism here in the United States when it comes to the implementation and the enforcement of our laws. Look, we are a land of laws, not people. That's what makes us different. We believe there is a thing called the Constitution. And if you don't believe that, then you're not thinking like an American.
Yeah, then get out of America. Bobby, this is really failed leadership, really at the top. And I think our members, they see that they're with you. Um, now, as we all know, we have three branches of government, and those three branches are really intended to be checks on each other. And
Mm-hmm.
all of this federal overreach by Biden and his administration and by a one party Congress, it leads us to the question, can the U.S. Supreme Court stay above it? Can they exercise discretion and keep us faithful as a nation of laws to the Constitution? So I'd like for you, Bobby, to give us a few insights into what you're seeing coming down the pike at the Supreme Court this term, maybe one or two cases that we should focus on, and where you think those cases might go. For example, we're talking the Second Amendment. We see Roe v. Wade and decisions on abortion. So if you could, and then I do want to, before I let you leave us today, I do want to talk a little bit about some history. But first, on the Supreme Court, let's talk a little bit into what you see coming down the pike.
Boy, Rebecca, again, you've pointed to something that is just below the surface, and that is that the Supreme Court is the last real check on the other two branches, which have really run amok. And so far have they run amok that in Congress and in the president and in the White House, they're talking about trying to pack the Supreme Court. They want to politicize that last branch and control it. And you have at the moment, you have a 5-4 divide. Some would say 6, but I'm going to say 5-4 divide, in which the conservatives, who are essentially textual conservatives, they believe you should actually read and apply what you read in the Constitution. They actually believe the founders meant what they said. And that's what makes a judicial conservative. That's different from a political conservative. Political conservative can have lots of opinions about things, but a judicial conservative is a textualist, an original thinker. They say, look, we have this document and we know what went into this document. We have the Federalist Papers. We know what they meant in this document. And this document has made the United States of America what we are today. Why? Because it's limited government and it has allowed the freedom of the people to expand. So a couple of cases. There's a case currently, Dobbs v. Jackson, which is up before the Supreme Court. To my view, probably the most important case that they will hear this term, although there are half a dozen really important cases before them. This one is a Mississippi case that is a direct confrontation to Roe v. Wade. And you got to remember that prior to Roe v. Wade, and what did Roe v. Wade do in 1973? Roe v. Wade said there's a constitutional right for abortion. You have a constitutional right to kill a child. And then the Democrats in New York and elsewhere say kill them right up to birth. And, you had a Virginia governor, current Democrat, who said, yeah, you can even kill them after birth if you want. Okay, that's the
all
kind
men,
of
by the way.
All men, by the way.
This.
By the way, so
and we've got to remember why. Again, it wasn't for their own personal benefit. But go ahead. Yep.
Right. You are, Rebecca, and you're an extraordinary spokesperson.
Or was it? Was it their monetary benefit? Was it a favor? And again,
right.
I love that movie Roe v. Wade, but
yeah.
Please.
So the bottom line is this decision, when it came down, actually reversed 41 state laws. So there were 41 state laws saying no or significant restriction on this act for moral reasons, because we're a moral country. And at the end of the day, it completely upended the thing. And even those who have looked at the jurisprudence, what's happened over the years since is that it's been chipped away, because it was actually on a very weak foundation. The jurisprudence behind it couldn't really support it. So now you have direct confrontations with that. You have the Texas heartbeat law, which will undoubtedly eventually get to the court. You have and right now there's a back and forth between a district judge who's an Obama appointee who wants to block the implementation of a law in Texas that says after you hear a human heartbeat, you can't kill that child. The Fifth Circuit reversed that district judge and said that the Texas people are right. If they want to prevent that from happening, they have the right to do that. Now the same Merrick Garland, who's trying to push things at school boards and chill speech, is actually trying to upend the Fifth Circuit's pause on the restraint of the Texas law. So all that's a little complicated, but the short of it is there are two big issues, at least, that are coming before the court. One is abortion in the Mississippi case. And then the second one is a case that actually involves a New York pistol club that essentially is going to test whether or not we really still have a Second Amendment. And in fact, it's going to go a bit further. And they've accepted cert on that. And they'll hear this month, they'll hear arguments, I believe, on the Second Amendment case. And in December, they will hear arguments on the in November, they will hear arguments on the Second Amendment case. And then in December, they'll hear it on the abortion case. But the short of it is, do Americans have a right to carry a firearm? And in New York and in a number of other states, I would say probably a dozen, maybe more, Democrat leaders have said, nah, we're not going to give you a concealed carry unless you can show cause. Well, the Constitution doesn't say you have a right to keep and bear arms if we decide you have a right to keep and bear arms. It says you have a right to keep and bear arms. And that's a fact. And in fact, Scalia wrote one of the most in Heller, one of the most profound defenses of that. So the short right now is that the Supreme Court is being tested, and I guarantee you, when they come down with opinions that this leftist Democrat-controlled Congress and White House do not like, they are going to ask that people forget the legitimacy or question the legitimacy of the Supreme Court, and that is dangerous.
Yeah. Wow, Bobby. It's we certainly are at a time in history when constitutional rights are uniquely under fire, and we do have to stand up for our freedoms. They're just so sacred. Our rights to free speech, worship, assembly, travel, self-protection, protection of others, our
Yes.
protected border. We've got to care about these things. These things have to matter. Um, it's just unbelievable when I think about Schiller, what's happening to him, or parents that are being attacked totally in the wrong for the NSBA and for our president to single out parents at school board meetings. Boy, does that get under my skin. In any event, and I pray that this nation understands and values life, from conception to natural death. And so I do pray that more people have the courage, that they listen to that quiet voice. Bobby, you and I spoke about that they understand that given all that we know today, all that science teaches us, that there is life. And certainly there's no need. I think most Americans um, would say, yeah, we're largely against abortion after first trimester, kind of a thing. You see what I'm saying? Isn't there? Can't we find? Why is this abortion up till birth being pushed by the left? It really is sickening. It's sad. It's strange.
Well, and I will
Anyway,
just note, and Rebecca, later this week, people should stay tuned. Later this week, we will have a piece up on amac.us called Listen to Your Heart. And it is probably,
I can't
in my own
wait
personal
to read
view, it
that.
might be one of the better pieces I've ever written because it is truly from the heart. And the idea
Right.
behind it is that let's stop talking about this as a political issue. Let's stop talking about it in those terms. And let's
That's
think about
good.
it as a moral,
Yeah.
personal, human issue of conscience. And actually take a moment and think about things. That piece urges people to think about things they've never thought about. So I hope
It sure
people read it.
does. And I wanted to pull up my phone here just because, we put out a poll on our website each and every week. And usually we'll push it out to AMAC members on Saturday. And I just want to read folks the poll and tell you folks we're AMAC members. So we said earlier this month, pro-abortion activists concerned that the Supreme Court may overturn Roe v. Wade descended on Washington, D.C. and in cities throughout the nation. And so we asked AMAC members, which of the following statements most closely reflects your opinion on how America views abortion? So we were asking people, what do you think America thinks about abortion? Option one, I believe most Americans are pro life or against abortion after the first trimester. Option two, some Americans feel it is inappropriate to impose their views on others, regardless of how they feel. Option three, more Americans believe that life begins at conception and therefore oppose abortion. We gave a fourth option, abortion is the taking of a human life. But sadly, not enough Americans understand the horrors of abortion, and our youth must be better educated. The fifth option, some Americans are personally against abortion, but believe women have the authority over their own bodies. The final option was, I believe that most Americans are pro choice. And so the number one, and I don't know if you got to see this, but AMAC members are really pretty dead on when it comes to how the majority of the rest of Americans feel. It's quite amazing. It's kind of like in that "Who wants to be a millionaire?" question. If you poll the audience is usually right. Here's what AMAC members said. The number one choice they went with was abortion is the taking of a human life. Sadly, not enough Americans understand the horrors of abortion, and our youth should be taught to honor the sanctity of human life. With a runner up being, I believe most Americans are pro life or against abortion after the first trimester. This to me, Bobby, tells me that America is at a different place morally as it relates to their views or our views as a nation on abortion. And so, again, when we hear the left, when we hear the media pushing it out and talking about how it's health care and how by stripping this right to murder your child in the womb is stripping a woman of health care, that is all a bunch of BS. It's really meant to, I think, um, poison the mind. Like I said earlier, it can be done. People can use words and language to really get you to buy into something that is just so morally wrong. But that's uplifting to me, Bobby, that AMAC members believe that the nation is shifting.
Well, one of the things that happens is when you bump into a hard question or you see national leadership go the wrong way, it causes you to stop and do a self-evaluation of what you really believe and why you believe it and how deeply you believe it. And one of the things that this Biden crowd is doing to all of us relative to abortion, relative to our constitutional amendments, is it's forcing us to think harder about this. I had a discussion with someone I'll call liberal recently, and she made all these arguments about, well, on the abortion front, these poor kids might be born into a poor family. And my comeback, there's lots of comebacks to that. But, my basic comeback was, do you think life generally, anybody that's alive today thinks that life might be preferable to death generally? And do you think maybe your parents made a decision that you'd continue to live because they decided? And finally, do you think maybe the fact that there's a line a mile long for adoptions might suggest that there'd be a home for a child if someone wants to not raise that child? So at the end of the day, all of these, now that is not the piece I wrote. The piece I wrote is about your heart. It's about following your heart. And it's a deep piece. It'll come out later this week. I think you'll like it. I think others will like it. But it causes people to just think harder. And maybe sometimes when rights are under attack, when we feel that when humanity, when moral guidance and the Bill of Rights in particular are under attack, but in particular something like the moral fiber of the country is under attack, it causes us all to think harder about things that we thought we had decided or we thought we'd figured out, but maybe we hadn't quite figured out.
Oh, Bobby, thank you so much. And these are tough topics, and maybe not spoken about enough because they are so difficult. They're tough. Critical race theory. See, AMAC is all about getting, really in the arena and rolling up our sleeves and doing the work that needs to be done, no matter how tough it is. So we're going to fight back against critical race theory, which AMAC members have told us week after week after week that they care that we are preventing or doing everything we can to stop the indoctrination of our children in schools. So wise of our membership to understand how important it is that families and parents have control over their children's education. And things like the pro-life issue and the anti-abortion. It is just it'll be a marvelous thing to see things like the heartbeat bill hold and be the law of the land in Texas. And I pray that other states have the ability to follow their lead. So this is all very hopeful, and I'm just so proud of people for speaking up and for having courage in doing this. Because the more that I see these people taking a strong stance against things like critical race theory, the more hope I have in the future of our country. So we're just going to encourage that. Resources on our website. Bobby, I know you've got to run. I've got to run, but I love to wrap up our show with a little bit of history. We do call this the Reb and Rob show on truth and history. So we love to talk about truth. But if you can sort of share with us a few stories. I know that you've got some really amazing, some memorabilia actually that I think that you and I spoke about that you want to share with us today. So
Yeah.
very excited to
Yeah.
hear you do that.
And
Thanks.
I
Go ahead.
appreciate your indulging the time. The bottom line here is, by the way, Theodore Roosevelt would love what you just said, because he said it's the person in the arena that makes all the difference. They're the ones that do get a little dirty fighting, but we've got to support them because they're fighting. So speaking of fighting, what happened is many years ago, I came into possession of a couple of letters, private letters, that were written by Eddie Rickenbacker. Now, who is Eddie Rickenbacker? He was the most decorated World War I ace. I think he had 24 shoot downs, really decorated World War I ace, actually flew in World War II as well, founder of Eastern Airlines, a guy. But one of the stories that, before I read you a chunk of this letter, he wrote different letters, but these are just two letters that he wrote to his close friend at Christmas. One was written in 1946, right after World War II ended, and the other was written in 1963, almost 20 years later, 17 years later, when he was contemplating where America was going. And the extraordinary part about this is again, one of the most decorated military heroes in American history. Interestingly, he, at one point, he and a crew were stranded on the open ocean, and they were dying. They had no food. Everything was gone. And they prayed fervently that somehow God give them some rescue. And interestingly, and he wrote about this, and not in these letters, but he wrote about this beyond any. They hadn't seen animals or birds or anything for an extended period of time, weeks, I think, and a seagull landed on his head, and he was able to reach up, and that fed them for enough time for them to actually stay alive. They had other seagulls came, and it kept them. So for the rest of his life, he fed seagulls at the end of a pier in his off time. But these letters are extraordinary. And so one of them, written in Christmas 1946, the war has just ended, and it's the warnings in these letters that I find so stunning. He says, for many years, he's talking to a friend, for many years, including a few years prior to and during World War II, the main objective of our leadership, government and otherwise, as well as the propaganda artists, was to teach the American people, men, women, and children, how to hate the Germans and Japs. And then he goes on deep into this and says, all of this was so he says, we lost a lot of people, and now we're out of the war on the other side. But he said, I'm fearful, basically, that we've taught ourselves how to hate so well that we will begin to hate ourselves. He says, all of the good things are a signal for peace, love, and goodwill toward men. But since the hate was instilled in hearts and minds of millions, and there were no more Germans and Japs to hate, we started to hate our allies and to hate ourselves. Republicans hate Democrats, and Democrats hate Republicans. Fascists are being hated, and last but not least, employees have begun to be taught to hate the boss, the company for which they work, and the stockholders who own it. And he goes on, and he eventually says, let us take inventory of ourselves and our pet hates as we approach the holiday season, with the hope that we may again recapture our respect and admiration for our fellow man, eliminate the hates from our hearts and minds, and proceed with the teachings of Christ, so that, once again, we may enjoy the peace and tranquility of the laws and liberties of this great land of ours. And then 20 years later, 17 years later, he's writing to a friend about the presidential election of 1964. And he's not a political guy. He was never very political. But he says, in a very bold private statement to this friend of his, he says, we need to, quote, look over our shoulder and then look ahead and see what it is that we should be doing, should be looking for in our leaders. Now, this is stunning. This is written in 1963. He says, my creed for the person that I would have elected president, such an image I entitle a man. That could be a man or a woman, but he says in 1963, a man. A man who has the convictions with courage and character to put them into action. A man who will not cater to or coddle minorities or pressure groups. A man who will think in terms of the welfare of the great American majority. A man who will recommend amending our labor laws to protect the American laboring men and women from racketeers and false leadership. A man who will respect states' rights. A man who will guarantee to return all delegated wartime or national powers to the elected representatives of the people. A man who will surround himself with America's ablest men and women. A man who will eliminate bureaucracy to the minimum. A man who will reduce and keep government expenses within the earning power of the people to pay. A man who will think in terms of America first in order that America will last, as Adenauer, de Gaulle, and Khrushchev think of their own. A man who will cooperate with other peoples of the world to ensure a lasting peace, but not at the expense of the American people alone. A man who believes in free enterprise and our form of government. A man in whom the American people can place their trust after he is elected as well as before. How stunning that in 1946 and then again in 1963, one of the greatest war heroes of America could see into the future and say, beware, because these are the things we need in our leaders and we may not get them.
Wow. Really interesting, and I love yeah, it's as if he wrote that letter that he wrote 17 years later when he said, "Look over your shoulder." In other words, don't forget your past and where you came from, but focus forward. And
That's
and
right.
and using those words of America first, boy, do I miss feeling that America is being put first
That's right.
by our very own president. What a shame that we're not there, but it is hopeful, Bobby, and it just reminds us that these things, I pray this is a pendulum that has gone so far that we're going to see it come back down again. In the meantime, we're going to keep doing everything that we do, and that is working on the Hill, working on the issues that AMAC members care so much about, protecting their Social Security, strengthening our healthcare system, doing all that we can to ensure that the lives of all Americans, but especially those 50 and older, is improving and getting better and better each day. Check out amac.us for AMAC benefits too, because Bobby, we've got so many members saving benefits on our website. If you're paying $16 a year for your 1-year membership and you're not taking advantage of the hundreds of dollars of savings in member benefits, then you're missing out. So go ahead and make sure you check out so many AMAC member benefits to choose from, whether you're traveling, discounts at hotels, motels, car rentals. These things don't cost anything. You're just getting a savings. If you're ordering flowers, those kinds of things, we have discounts through all kinds of services, retail services as well. So Bobby, thank you so much for your ability to communicate this information to us in such a big picture way. I appreciate having you with us here today. Everything you shared with us, for me, it's invaluable, Bobby, and very uplifting. So thank you so much for your time today.
Always a privilege. And I just love the fact that AMAC is doing, and your leadership and AMAC is, as members, are doing things that America so desperately needs at this time.
Oh, thank you. And I want to thank those listening, especially our AMAC members, for tuning in today. And if you haven't downloaded the AMAC News app, go ahead and do that. You can listen to today's podcast and all of our podcasts right on the AMAC News app. Simply search AMAC. And then, of course, you can track all kinds of breaking news that we're posting fresh each and every day. So go ahead and make sure to hit that subscribe button, like, follow, and share everywhere that you're on social media. Until next time, everyone, I'm Rebecca Weber. This is your podcast, Better for America. Thank you for being here. God bless you, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Better for America podcast. To learn more about AMAC and all it has to offer, visit us at www.amac.us.